So I'm going to talk about mentalising in practice, what it is and where it comes from. You're going to become very familiar with this over the next weeks. This is what we call the ambit wheel, and it really tries to just map out in a reasonably sort of coherent way what ambit is all about. And the whole of ambit is kind of really about using these ideas that I'm going to talk about, mentalising, using them with our clients, using them with our colleagues in our team, using them across networks of multi-agency things, and then using the connection between mentalising and learning to help the team take a line around how we learn as a group of professionals doing the work that we do. So, you can come in, Peter, if you want. I am on film. Okay, mentalising. First of all, I much prefer it for people to refer to it as mentalising rather than mentalisation, because it's a verb, it's a thing our minds are either active doing or not, because they're doing something else. And it's a pity when we talk about mentalisation, because people start to think that there's a sort of mentalisation lump that I've either got or I haven't got, and it's definitely not that. So Peter Fonagy, who is probably the name most closely associated with developing this as a model with Anthony Bateman, his colleague, they developed mentalisation-based treatment for adults who have borderline personality disorders. He repeats this in many different ways, but he talks about this as the least novel idea and practice that you can possibly imagine. So anybody who came wanting something completely brand new, shiny, and never before seen will be disappointed because it's not. It really is quite a conscious attempt to bring together the learning from a whole group of academic disciplines and practices in a way that kind of creates a language that hopefully all can find that the point of view and the research that's been going on for 120 years or so is, I hope, respectfully represented. So nothing new, and if you want a horse race where I'm going to use mentalising to kind of bash another model of therapy or making sense of the world, you're not going to get that. And if you do notice me doing it, pull me up. Okay. So here's Socrates, not a man who knew anything about the word mentalising, and he says, "I'm the wisest man alive, for at least I understand that I understand almost nothing." And this, I think, is absolutely in the territory of mentalising. So he's reflecting on his own thinking and his own capacity to know, and also he's knowing about the limits of his knowing. And remember, in ambit, we think about ambit as our sphere of influence. It's worth knowing where I do have influence, but it's equally rather important to know where I actually genuinely don't have any influence. So knowing what I don't know is pretty critical. And mentalising practice has, I suppose, a sort of character of it sounds very unhumble to say that it's a sort of humility in there, but there is a kind of humility in a mentalising practitioner, because we're very, very conscious of our not knowing what it's actually like to be in somebody else's shoes, but we can do some imagining of it. Okay, so I'm going to start right early on in the kind of development of this idea. So this is some work by a wonderful researcher called George Gergely, Hungarian researcher at UCL, now back in Hungary. And they showed a whole series of these videos that they designed, and this is just one I'm going to show you. And they showed a whole series of them to really very young babies, about 4 months old if I remember rightly. And what they were looking at was to see which of these two films that I'm going to show you does a 4-month-old baby kind of find more attractive or find more interesting, are they drawn to. In fact, how they look at it is the other way around. They look to see which one they get bored of most quickly. But I'm going to show you two films, and I want you to imagine that you're 4 months old now. You're 4 months old, you've just managed to maintain language, you're incredibly good at understanding what I'm saying. But other than that, you're 4-month-old babies. I'm going to show you two films, and I want you to tell me which one you think, as a 4-month-old baby, you'd be happy to see again, and possibly again, and possibly again and again. So here's the first film. 4 months old. 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 4 I didn't promise you sophisticated plot lines or great photography. Here's the second film. Now, these films have been shown to lots and lots and lots of 4-month-old babies across many cultures, and this is a very robust finding. One of those films, 4-month-old babies definitely prefer, and one of them they just get bored of rather more quickly. So, hands up for the first. Hands up for the second. Ooh. Yeah, well, I got it wrong first time I looked. I thought it was the first, so I'm definitely with you. So most of you were absolutely spot on, that they are definitely drawn to the second one. Anyone got any ideas about why?
The solid black block that they can use as like a fixed point of reference.
Okay, so the black box is a sort of more of a sort of fixed focus point. Yeah, okay, yeah, that might be.
Capacity to conceptualise why the small ball needs to go up over something.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, and it's unfair because this is one of many films that they've done lots and lots of different ideas. They've got sort of little triangles and big triangles, and the little triangle gets kind of trapped in a square that it can't get out of because the big bully triangle keeps pushing it back in there, and you only realise that when the square appears, and when it doesn't, it just looks like they're doing a weird kind of shimmy in a dance. And likewise, the balls, they travel the same way in both the films, exactly the same, and they just either do or do not have a wall. And there are many, many of these, and what they built up over this series was that films that had a definite sort of story, if you like, a story of, let me say it. Who else saw a kind of mummy ball and a baby ball, and the mummy ball called and the baby ball said hey, and then kind of ran towards mummy, and then without the ball, in a rather random way ran back and then kind of did a leap and kind of went forward. And then in the second one it was obvious why they did the leap, and because they were it was trying to get somewhere it couldn't, and it had to go back and have a think about it, and then it managed it. So what seems to be that even at 4 months old, babies have this kind of inbuilt ability to attribute, if you like, an intention to something that's as non-human as a blob. And that they have this kind of radar for intentionality, and they're interested by it. They're more interested by stories where there is something trying and then striving and then arriving. They're drawn to it. We've got these kind of intention detectors, if you like, that are very much part of our earliest kind of brain unfoldings, that we look for intentions and we attribute intentions to stuff. So just hold that in our minds as we go forward.
Is that also true with children who grew up to be on the autistic spectrum? They choose the second?
Less so, much less so. And here is a good quote. So that's a question about whether this is the case with children who are on the autistic spectrum. This is a quote from Simon Baron-Cohen, who's a professor up in Cambridge, most known for his work on this idea of the theory of mind. And the theory of mind is something that children on the autistic spectrum really struggle to find. All of the slides and everything, you can access it all on the internet, so by all means make notes, but don't feel that you've got to write it. So he writes, imagine what your world would be like if you were aware of physical things, but were blind to the existence of mental processes. I mean, of course, blind to things like thoughts, beliefs, knowledge, desires, and particularly intentions, which for most of us, self-evidently, underlie behaviour. So in a way, one way of thinking about mentalising is thinking what it would be like in a world where you just couldn't really do this at all, which was to make sense of behaviour by thinking about, well, what are the thoughts of the person doing the behaviour? What do they believe will happen by doing whatever they're doing? My grandmother would have had a very clear idea about why Dickon put his hand in the cookie jar but did so secretly, because she would have known that he likes cookies. He also knows that she would say no because she's just about to serve him his tea or something, and he won't eat his tea if he's filled himself up with cookies. So she would have had an idea about that it would explain my secretive behaviour on the basis of some of these ideas about what might be going on in my mind. So this is one way people think about this, is it's like a folk theory. You don't need to be a psychologist, you don't need to be any kind of ologist. It's people behave in the way they do because at some level in their mind things are weighing up to make sense to do that rather than this. So here's our sort of dictionary definition of mentalizing, and I've highlighted almost every word because they're all kind of critical, but I'm just going to go through them a little bit. So we talk about it as an imaginative activity. So it's imaginative. I hope that conjures up this idea of a sort of musing about things. It's a kind of amusedness, a kind of reflecting on the play of ideas. It's an imaginative activity. It's an activity. As I said before, we like mentalizing, not mentalization, because it's a verb. It's something we're doing or we're not doing. And at times it's not a very helpful thing to do. And we'll think about that. At times it's not a helpful thing to be doing too much mentalizing. You want to be doing more different kinds of thinking. So it's an imaginative activity, and it's all about making sense of something very concrete, which is behavior. Okay? Something that all of us have access to, all of us see. So it's, how do I make sense of behavior? Well, I do so by, in an imaginative way, trying to kind of think about the why. And then critically, I can mentalize myself, you know, the kind of, why did I drink 19 pints of Guinness last night? Why do I keep doing this? That will be a kind of an attempt to sort of make sense of my own behavior. And for those of you who come from a psychodynamic background, of course, it allows the fact that there are lots of things that I do, not that I drank 19 pints, but there are lots of things that I do that it isn't immediately apparent to me why I do it, but I might be able to get into a state of mind where I can start to think about why I might have done it on that occasion when I don't normally do it. So I'm allowing myself, if you like, an unconscious or pre-conscious functioning. So I can mentalize myself, or I can mentalize other people, and, you know, trying to stand up and talk to you to some extent. My, you know, under the water, my legs are kind of paddling away. I'm trying to mentalize by observing your behavior. If any of you start to kind of nod off or dribble, or, you know, you don't laugh at my weedy jokes, I'll immediately start to try to mentalize you even more furiously and kind of frenziedly to try to kind of be more helpful in the way that I communicate. And we do this making sense by referring to the idea that, you know, there is a mind there that has intention. The little ball that was going blub 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 and the big ball that was going blub blub blub, the little ball had an intention to get to be with the mummy ball. Yeah, and it's that sort of idea that I'm imagining behavior on the basis that there's a mind, a mentality, hence the word mentalizing. It's the attribution of a mind, a mentality, yeah, behind behavior. And it is that simple. That's it, you know, that's mentalizing, making sense of behavior on the basis that there's a mind that has kind of caused that behavior to happen. Some of the things that are worth knowing about. We know quite a lot, not everything, but quite a lot about the brain science behind this. We know that you can actually see the bits of the infant brain that are particularly connected with this intention detector. We know which bits of the brain light up when infants are starting to kind of look at and interpret intentions. We know that it's really this blue bit. I spend an awful lot of time in my clinical practice grabbing my own forehead and sometimes young people's or family members' foreheads and saying, there, it's in there, it's happening in there now while you're doing that kind of thinking. That's what's happening. So we know where it happens. What's really interesting about that is that if I put somebody into one of these functional MRI scanners, big metal donut, and I show them a bit of film, and at a certain point I pause the film and I say, okay, what do you think that character is going to do next? They'll be kind of going, well, I think that she thinks that he's trying to hit on her, so she's probably doesn't really like him, so I think she's probably going to back off, or she's going to say something polite and make her escape. At the point that they're doing that thinking, you can see this part of the brain in real time getting more blood flow and being active. It's quite interesting. But if I did the same thing with the same person and I said, okay, thank you very much for going into this metal donut. It's kind of claustrophobic in there. You know, it's scary. It's very noisy machines. Why did you agree to do this study? The person might kind of go, oh, well, I don't know. I like the idea of advancing science. actually, if I'm honest, you promised me a picture of my brain, and that's probably what tipped it for me. I want to know I've got a brain that looks like other people's. Just at the same as they're doing that thinking, it's the same bit of brain that gets busy, because they're interpreting their own behaviour. Why did I do this? They're interpreting their own behaviour in terms of their intentions. Okay, so that's kind of, again, an interesting finding, that we've only got one bit of brain, if you like, that can make sense of behaviour, whether it's making sense of your behaviour or making sense of my own behaviour. I've only got one piece of mechanism that can do that. And again, it makes a bit of sense about why it's kind of easy to get a little bit muddled up between, my intentions and your intentions. And when we got you to introduce each other at the beginning of the day, it was kind of fascinating to see, how it's slightly difficult when you're hearing somebody else introduce you to sort of not feel that you want to kind of chip in and involve that, or talk a bit about how you feel about it. It's quite difficult to stay with what the task was to think about the other person's intentions for being there. So another factor that's important to point out right at the beginning is that it'd be easy to think that this is really then, okay, so you've either got the mentalising lump or you haven't, you're born with it or you're not born with it. That's definitely not the case. And that's one of the most fascinating and exciting things about mentalising. So you may have the machinery, and if you're unlucky enough to be born on the autistic spectrum, you're going to struggle to do this in the very sort of subtle and sophisticated, kind of rather natural ways that most of us are lucky enough to be able to do. But even if you've got all of that, the point about mentalising that's absolutely critical is that mentalising is absolutely a relational idea. It's born in a relationship. I learn to mentalise. I learn about my own mind and how it works by seeing my mind reflected in the mind of another person. So you learn to mentalise by having an experience of being mentalised by somebody that you trust, that you're in a relationship with. I'm going to expand on that a bit later, but it's very critical, because the work that you do with young people, actually a lot of what you're doing, whether you described it in these words or not, has been you've been actively trying to mentalise these young people, and when you get it right, a young person tends to point at you and go, yeah, that's exactly how it is. No, that's how it is. And that is a great moment in a kind of therapeutic relationship, when the young person recognises something of their own experience in your mind, or the words that you're saying, or the way that you're showing it back to them. And to be recognised in that way is fabulously kind of satisfying for the human condition. And one of the teams talked about a young person being seen, that's one of your missions, and I thought that was a really lovely way of putting it. The third critical thing that I think is worth knowing about mentalising is that we're not very good at it. We're designed so that it gets destabilised, it goes offline very easily. Okay, we're not very good at it because, as far as we're aware, we're nearly the only animal species that does anything like the sophistication of what we're talking about. Higher primates, quite small measures of mentalising. If you look at the prefrontal cortex, the bit where mentalising takes place, rather kind of tiny little areas in even the higher primates. So the human brain has put a lot of energy into evolving this bit of brain. Even the Neanderthal man, his brain, if you looked at his brain, piddly little prefrontal cortex, very little, massive big visual cortex, and he had really big eyes. So he put all his energy into evolving a visual system. So poor old Neanderthal could see Homo sapiens from about 3 miles away, that they were coming, they're coming. And so Neanderthal did what Neanderthal did, which was to turn and run away, probably because they were kind of known to be a bit scary, we imagine. But the problem was poor old Neanderthal didn't have this bit of the brain, because Homo sapiens had a good idea about where he would run. So they could have other Homo sapiens around the corner ready to put an end to. That's complete sort of fantasy, but there is some paleo neuroarchaeology, or whatever they call it, to suggest that is the case, that Neanderthal had a much smaller prefrontal brain. So we're not very good at doing it. It's a very new function of mind, and it's very easily destabilised and overtaken by much more sort of ancient structures that do threat and arousal and things like that. So that one of the things that we'll come back to a lot in the whole training is that mentalizing and states of high anxiety or arousal are like two sides of a seesaw. And the work that you've been describing this morning, and that long list of the kind of stressors that you have in your workplace that make the work that you do incredibly difficult, means that we need to pay attention to the fact that it's all very well for us to think about how we might help the young people and their families to mentalize well, but actually hanging on to my own mentalizing when I'm out in the field, a long way from my colleagues, facing high-risk situations, that's pretty critical. So one of our sort of mottos in AMBIT is that this work does make you worried, and it should make you worried. That if you don't get worried doing the work, you're probably in the wrong job. But what we want to make sure is that people don't allow the fact that this work worries them then to knock out their own mentalizing in ways that becomes unhelpful. So why do we need a new word? Because in a sense there's nothing new. Well, humans are always repackaging and rebranding something, but I quite prefer the third is that it's a representation. Okay, it's a representation of already known materials. And actually that's how mentalizing works. I have an emotion, and my mother represents it back to me by kind of going, oh, you know, I'm screaming or I'm excited. Oh, and my mother looks at me and goes, oh yes, this is exciting. So I'll show you some pictures of that sort of thing later. But I think that in a sense, that's quite a helpful way of thinking about mentalizing. It's just showing us something in a slightly new way that allows us to add some kind of nuance around the edge to mark a few differences. So some of the differences that I think are worth thinking about are things like, I'm just going to go back. Some of the things that are worth thinking about are that mentalizing has many things in common with other effective therapies. In fact, we think that most of the effective therapies that are out there have found very, very helpful, effective ways of helping people to mentalize. Mentalizing practitioners try to be much more focused on this particular quality of mind. There's a bit of sort of psychoeducation, teaching the young person that, you know, that's what I'm talking about, that kind of thinking that you've done now. It has a kind of playfulness. Humour is definitely part of the method. There's a real stress to avoid the kind of any kind of jargon, and actually quite a deliberate attempt to kind of keep things calm in the session, because we don't want to do things that would make the young people think this is weird or this is strange or this is stressful, because it will make their mentalizing less able to take place. So we use humour and playfulness and ordinary language as a technique. There's a kind of, I suppose, mentalizing practitioners, there's what we call a moderated amount of self-exposure. We wouldn't try to be too sort of blank to the young person. In fact, in the opposite, as much as I can, I'm showing the young person the workings of my mind, showing them the theories, but offering the theories as a sort of what the systemic practitioners have. There's a lovely phrase they talk about safe uncertainty. That, you know, it's okay that I don't know what it's like to be you, but this is the best guess I've got at the moment. Is that any good? And what I'm looking for is the young person who can say, well, you know, you got that right, the rest is rubbish, it's nothing like me. That's helpful to me. I want to be able to show them my workings. So those are some of the things that we can come on to a bit in other sessions. I've covered this already, the fact that we've only got one piece of brain that does mentalizing, whether I'm mentalizing myself or whether I'm mentalizing other people. Okay, so let's just try and get a little bit more specific. We've thought a little bit about what mentalizing might be. There's a whole load of nice little sort of catchphrases that can try and summarize that. I think I'll show them later on. But let's just try and see, well, what would you actually see in front of you if the person in front of you was doing some of this mentalizing thing? And there's a range of different qualities, none of which are particularly original or new. But one is curiosity. Again, systemic practitioners particularly have been very keen on this as a concept, as an idea. So here's a little guy who is, that's what somebody who's mentalizing looks like. Actually, it's very interesting that that it's almost like if you turn your head from one side to the other, you're definitely trying to sort of see the world from different perspectives, aren't you? It's kind of like, could be like that, but on the other hand, it could be like that. So there's a kind of quality of kind of not knowing, and you might be curious about yourself and your behaviour. Why do I do this? You might be curious about the other person. You might be curious about the mind of the other. You might be aware of the fact that there are limits to your knowing. So you're curious because you know that you don't know. And a lot of the literature in the mentalising things goes on about this idea of a not knowing stance. Again, not a particularly new idea, but helpful, I think, for me when I'm working with a young person particularly. There's nothing better to kind of really annoy a young person that I'm trying to work with if I assume to know what it's like to be in their shoes. That's the royal road to a young person telling me in no uncertain terms he doesn't want to see me again. Whereas to demonstrate a genuine curiosity and an acceptance that I can't know what it's like is helpful. And the other thing, a sort of curiosity about kind of stringing together the story of how I came to be in this particular predicament or in this particular situation. How did I come to be, doing what I'm doing? That might be, only explaining it over the last couple of hours. My car got clamped, then I did this, and then I hit him. Well, that sort of makes sense. That's why I kind of lost my rag rather more quickly than that. Or it may be over a decade or more. Second of the sort of markers of mentalising is, and it's a bit jargony, so I'm sorry about that. When we talk about affect, we mean feeling in the here and now. So affect is to climate, emotions so affect is the weather here and now. Rather than the climate, which is your mood over sort of the last month or so. Yeah. So affect is what it feels like emotionally here and now. And if people are mentalising, they're kind of aware, they have an awareness that these sort of high levels of emotion might make it more difficult for me to mentalise you or for you to mentalise me. So if I'm mentalising well, then in trying to persuade one of my children to go and do some revision or something like that, I might be able to say, look, I know inside me I'm boiling over with anxiety and rage at their kind of non-engagement in this task, but for me to roar at them is unlikely then to get them into a mood that they're going to go and sit down and learn stuff. So if I'm mentalising, I might be able to just kind of take a line that however rageful I feel, exposing the child to that is not going to be a good idea. If I'm not mentalising, I'm more likely to just sort of bash into them and stuff gets messy. This is one of my favourite markers of mentalising, that minds are opaque, as in you can't see into them. Somebody cleverly said, but that's not opaque, that's translucent, but you get the it would have been a boring picture if it had been properly opaque. So this idea that we absolutely don't do mind reading, that is not mentalising. It's the complete opposite. So there's a terrible TV series called The Mentalist. Does anyone watch it? It's the most irritating programme in the world. It should be banned because it's completely the opposite of a mentalising. This man just walks into a room and he knows the entire story of what's going on in your mind, and he doesn't have to do any thinking about it because he just knows and it's right, and it's really irritating. So he's completely non-mentalising, yeah? Whereas a mentalising approach is, I absolutely know that I don't know what it's like to be in your mind, but I have an imagination and I can apply my imagination and try out some hypotheses and some ideas and offer them to you and say, does that fit for you at all? That would be a more mentalising, my mentalising muscle. So if somebody is treating me as though they don't know what's in my mind but they're curious, they're probably mentalising. If they know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, they may not be. So when you have somebody saying, you always do this, or you never do that, or you're only doing this because, they're probably not mentalising at that point. There's a certain amount of certainty to them. Your mind is entirely open to me. I know absolutely why you're doing it. And we do that mostly with people that we're kind of passionately involved with. Mostly in our families, because we get very passionately involved, but particularly, you could also say the same thing happens in, it's not always negative emotions. Passionate love is rather an enemy of mentalising. You kind of assume all kinds of things about your beloved in the kind of throes of passionate love, don't you? So another marker of mentalizing is somebody who can, at least in an imaginative way, try to take another person's perspective. So I suppose I want to just highlight that that's not them knowing what it's like to be looking, but that they're actively trying to say, no, I can see that from your point of view, I must have come across as a bit angry. I didn't, that would be someone probably who's mentalizing. Yeah, they're trying to take somebody else's perspective. If I find myself on my sort of doorstep and my parent, let's say my father for the sake of argument, is roaring at me, absolutely roaring in my face, and I'm able to sort of mentalise my father and say, okay, so why are you roaring at me? This is kind of interesting. Oh, I know why, because I sent you a text, didn't I? I said I'd be back in 5 minutes, but that was 5 hours ago. Okay, so you've been really worried that I'm dead for the last 3 hours, and you've phoned all the A&E departments. And now I come to think of it, I'm mentalising myself a bit now, thinking about my behaviour. I've got this kind of inane grin on my face, and you can smell kind of a mixture of vodka and cannabis about me, and I'm swaying slightly and giggling. But actually, that's another trigger to you roaring, because you're roaring because actually it's passionately important to you that if I don't get that I have to treat people that care about me in a better way than this, my future relationship history is just doomed, and that I'm never going to kind of find people who would stick by me. Now, most adolescents would struggle to mentalise their parent perhaps as well as that. But you can see that it's the capacity to mentalise perhaps afterwards that enables you to come back to somebody and say, okay, you did roar at me a lot, but I can sort of understand. I can trust you that you had my best interests at heart. So again, not a very new concept, trust, but trust and being able to mentalise do seem to us to connect. And I referred to this a bit briefly with the dog, didn't I? That this idea that it's not that, if you meet the young person here, it's not that part of a mentalising technique is to get them to put every sort of step of the path that's brought them there into completely stark kind of thing. That's not our method. But the young person who can at least have some sort of story that makes sense in their mind about how they've come to be in the predicament they can would be another indicator. So, the young person is able to say, well, I suppose it is really difficult for me to trust people because, I didn't have very many people in my early years that ever were very nice to me. People that should have been nice to me weren't. That would be a very mentalising statement for a young person, and it's quite rare, that we get something as clear as that. Let's move on. So here's some sort of popular aphorisms and little kind of summary things that's just trying to capture what we're talking about, to see ourselves from the outside and others from the inside. It's quite nice. But this is my favourite: understanding, misunderstanding. I think that really, for me, captures the sort of very, very humane, forgiving element of what mentalising is about. Because mentalising assumes that we're not very good at doing this. We know that there's a limit to how good we are at making sense of people's behaviour, including our own. And that we know, therefore, that understanding is part of the nature of human relationships. If you look at all humour, look at any comedy. Most comedy is about what Shakespeare called the comedy of errors, isn't it? It's like the comedy of people just misunderstanding. Kind of, he thought that, but actually we all knew that it was this. Most comedy is about mismentalizing or misunderstandings. And I think for me that kind of, it's the effort to understand when I realise that I've misunderstood that is absolutely captures that, oh gosh, now I can see now that you look really like I've been really unclear. I need to make sense of that again. So it's that effort of mind to make sense of how I've not made very good sense to you, or how, what might be going on in your mind that's making you behave in this way that I've misunderstood. And it seems to me that that's a lovely two lovely words. I have many health warnings that I give young people or families that I work with, and one is that I promise them that I will misunderstand them, and I absolutely don't want to misunderstand them. That's I never want to misunderstand, but I know I'm human and I know I will get something a bit wrong, and that when I misunderstand them, it's really, really helpful for them to point out if I've got something wrong, because then I don't want to misunderstand them in the same way twice. But sometimes when I've misunderstood someone, that's the real opportunity for learning to take place. How did I get such an upside down idea? And it might be very useful for the young person to realise that when they do this, the person can easily misunderstand them in that way. So understanding misunderstanding. Having mind in mind, mindfulness of minds, and this is Peter Fonagy's, and that's why he's professor and I'm not. So we're going to move on. But lots of different ways of summarising this idea. Let me just talk a little bit now about the development of how this happens. We talked about the fact that to some extent you need this prefrontal cortex. That's where the activity takes place if we could see it in real time. But it's the relationships. It's in the experience of relationships that mentalising develops. And many of the young people that you work with have not had access to the kinds of relationships that help this facility to get strong. So here's a friend of mine, Sam, and this is his mother. And this was the first time I'd met Sam. Mother is a very old friend of mine, and Sam is now a young man who's given informed consent on his own rather than his mother for this photograph to be used. This is the first time I met Sam, and we were in the kind of entrance hall of their house, and new baby, everyone saying, "Oh, lovely to see you, how exciting, how lovely, what a beautiful baby you've got." And Sam and his mum are there, and I'm pointing my camera with its flash gun, making lots of loud clicky whirring noises. So I just want people to just for a moment kind of mentalise Sam. You've got about a 30th of a second of behaviour to imagine yourself into his mind with, which is the shutter speed when you're using flash photography. So it's not a lot of behaviour to go on, but mentalise him now. What's it like to be Sam at the moment?
Exciting.
Yeah. If it wasn't unfair, I would ask the camera to turn round at that point, and just because you said exciting, didn't you? You did this with your eyes, and I think that's quite nice, because I think that's what the mum's doing too. It's nearly always the women that get there first. But any other thoughts? Exciting? Curious? Yeah. Anything else? Engaged? Yeah. He's definitely in that moment, isn't he? Yeah. A bit. It's a bit chaotic. It's too much going on, yes. And actually, because what somebody did point out in the previous one, that he is kind of hanging on to mum a little bit. So there's a certain kind of like, okay, mum, you're saying this is okay. I'll go with that. But I particularly wanted to pick up what you did with your eyes, because I think I can nearly always get somebody in the audience to do this for me, which thank you weren't my plant. But this is the basic process where mentalising is born. That Mum is looking at son, and she's, if you like, mentalising him. She's imagining what it might be like to be her little baby in this experience, and she's coming out with exactly these kinds of ideas. And I would like to suggest that if Sam had eyebrows, they'd be something like that. Yeah? He's a bit young to have them. But of course, it's easy in a nice sort of pleasant, happy situation like this. What about when Sam is really, really angry, or howling and growling and screaming? How often do you see a mother holding her baby and the baby's really, really upset, and the mother's kind of going, "Oh, gee, you were so cross." And look, she's doing the same thing. She's mirroring. But it's not just a straight mirroring. I mean, she's not going, "Ah, this is bad." Yeah, she's doing what we call marked mirroring. So it's almost like she's caricaturing that, "Ooh, yes, you are cross. This is what cross looks like. And it's not me that's cross with you, because I'm doing some other things. And the marking is that I'm talking in this sing-song voice. Oh, yes, you're a cross patch. And I'm holding you gently. And I'm doing all the things that a mother might do to sort of address what she's imagining is going on in her child's mind." So we talk about this idea that the mother's having a picture of the mind of the baby's mind in her mind, and she's markedly mirroring. And this other word we use, and forget the jargon, it doesn't, but it's kind of helpful just to know, is that it's a contingent. And when we use that word, we mean that there's a fit between what she imagines might be going on in the young person's mind and what that might need to kind of make it better, if you like. So a very howling baby, a mother might be going, oh, you're cross, oh dear, and then she might say, well, did you need winding? Oh no, it's not that. Do you need feeding? No, you're not hungry. Oh, you've got a dirty nappy, So she'd go through a whole series of things. So those of you, again, who come from psychodynamic point of view, you'll recognise a lot of this work from people like Dickon, who talked about this idea of container and contain, this idea that the mother can take in some of the really unbearable feelings that the infant has, think about them, kind of imaginatively, come up with some solutions and thereby sort of help the baby to feel that the world isn't entirely erupting and exploding, it's kind of manageable. But in terms of mentalising, Sam's getting this kind of experience, every 3, 4, 5 minutes with a reasonably well-attuned mum. Mum sees the baby going, oh, you're going, oh yes, that's hot, oh gee, did you hurt yourself? It's happening all the time. She's showing the baby her imagined idea about what might be going on in the baby's mind. So bit by bit the baby develops this idea that I see myself, not by just kind of looking at my own navel, but I see myself in the face of somebody that I know and I trust. And that's where I learned that I've got a mind that sometimes is a happy mind, sometimes is a sad mind, and sometimes is a frightened mind. Yeah, and it's that experience that we learn about ourselves in the minds of another that is where mentalising, I think, comes alive. And when we talk about it in the therapy situation or the caring situation, that's critical. So it isn't what Descartes wrote, I think, therefore I am. We don't just sort of sit there and suddenly realise, yes, I have an identity and a mind, I am an agent. No, it's that my mother thinks I think, therefore I am. It's like it's a relational thing. We develop a sense of ourself through our relationship with the mind of a trusted other. Yeah? And that's very critical, and we'll come back to that a little bit. So one other way of looking at mentalising is that it's a bit like the prefrontal cortex is like the conductor of a big unruly orchestra, which is the rest of the bits of the brain. There's a guy in Denmark called Paul Lundgaard Back who has a nice image. It's like being in a big open sort of hall with a very powerful spotlight, and the mentalising bit is shining the spotlight at the bit that you need to kind of get a bit active with in order to get you in the right relationship with the rest of the world. So it might be that at times I need to be mentalising you. It might be at times that I need to sort of rock back and think, actually, am I making sense now, or am I just waffling on? It might be at times that I need to mentalise the feeling in the room. What's it like to be you now? It's kind of tiring, it's been a long morning, I'm going on a bit. And it might be at times that I need to mentalise the cognitions, the thoughts. How much are you actually kind of making sense of the ideas that I'm trying to talk about? Okay, we kind of rock between those. It might be at times that I need to kind of be close to somebody I feel safe with. I've got Peter here as my attachment object, but it might be at times that actually, I need to just get out of here and be sort of doing more active running away or fighting. So that mentalising, if you like, is this kind of spotlight that's saying, well, where do you need to be? Mind, brain, let's be having the right bits of you to get me in the right relationship with the world around me and the social world in particular. I'm going to stop that because it'll make us ill. And the other bit, of course, that sometimes we mentalise explicitly. Sometimes I really do think, I've really upset that person. What did I say that might have upset them? I wonder what it might be like being in their shoes. I wonder what I've done. But often, and like when you introduced each other, right, first thing this morning, you weren't sort of thinking, no, I must work out the intentional stance of this person so I can introduce you. You just did it. You did it what we would call implicitly or automatically. And that's just fine, isn't it? Yeah. So it's a relief that when you go and have a candlelit dinner with your beloved and a single tear starts to kind of track down his or her cheek, you don't kind of go, ugh, they need to now mentalise you. What could be going on in your mind? You just take their hand, you kiss them, you know you kind of do it automatically. Yeah, we only do it in awareness when it's all going a bit wrong, is my experience, and that, I'm getting a message that I'm getting this wrong, aren't I? Yeah. So mentalizing is this mobile feature. At a later point I'll probably get out my icon of mentalizing, which is one of those toys from the 70s, a Weeble. Anyone remember the Weeble? So sort of like a little egg with a face on it, and it's got a weight at the bottom. And the motto is that they wobble but they don't fall down. So mentalizing is the capacity that I sort of can self-write. I can mentalize you a bit, and then I need to just mentalize myself. I can mentalize the affect. I can mentalize the kind of the thinking that's going on and the beliefs. And the point is not to be fixed in any of those positions, but to be able to move in the right place. And that's what this part of the brain is all about. It's about saying, hang on a moment, have I got this straight or not? Or have you understood what I'm saying? Yeah? So I want to go back to that really, really obvious thing, which was right at the beginning. And mentalizing is just making sense of behaviour by imagining that there's a mind for which it does make sense to behave like that. It may not make sense to me, but it must make sense at some level to that person. The rest of this is all really just fleshing out that idea. So one of the troubles that you guys have, I'm going to imagine, because I don't know, but I'm imagining, is that the young person that people you work with often have many different workers involved, maybe from many different teams. And those many different workers may have different trainings. They may have spent years training in psychotherapy, in social work, in psychiatry, in law, in youth work. They may have a very clear kind of model and a language that they make sense of the world and the problems and how they're doing what they're trying to do. And it's a problem sometimes for the young people, because from our point of view it's great. We've got sort of 5 different individuals from 4 different teams all kind of piling around this young person, but from the young person's point of view they all seem to be talking about different stuff. He's talking about genes and neurotransmitters, she's talking about emotions and patterns of behaviour, he's talking about deprivation and safeguarding, and it's like, well, if none of you guys can agree, why should I listen to any of you? I don't want to have 6 different conversations. It's hard enough for me to have one relationship. One of the things that we think is really helpful about mentalizing is that because it's deliberately trying to kind of pull together some of the learning from these different models, that it at least offers a hope of a kind of common language. So the cognitive behaviourist who's trying to connect particular feeling states with particular thoughts that tend to trigger particular behaviours that then make you feel in different ways or give you beliefs like that, well, actually what they're doing very effectively is helping a young person to mentalise. They're scratching their heads and with a bit of paper maybe saying, look, when you feel like that, what do you tend to think? Well, I think I probably tend to think this. And when you're thinking that, what do you tend to do? Well, I tend to do this. And how does that end up making you feel? Wow, that's the problem. They're mentalising. Yeah? The family therapist who sits with a family and is trying to help different family members make sense of each other and make sense of their impact on the system and how the system might have an impact on them, is really helping the family to make sense of each other's behaviour and to mentalise. And a lot of our methods are very closely fitting with family therapy practices. The psychoanalyst who has a patient on a couch, in many ways very different from a mentalising approach, quite hidden as a person. But when a psychoanalyst puts an interpretation into a session and gets it absolutely right, what happens? The patient kind of goes, oh wow, I'd never thought of it like that. That's really interesting. How did you, they're mentalising. The psychoanalyst has managed to trigger some mentalising in the young person. And I suppose a kind of a sensitivity to the fact that when you have a resistance to therapy, to change, that a psychoanalyst wouldn't sort of say, well, resistance is wrong. It's like resistance is something that needs to be understood. It makes sense from the person's point of view why they're not doing this and they're doing that. So let's try and understand it they're trying to mentalise. Yeah? And likewise, the social worker who might have rather a more kind of nuanced understanding of what deprivation or the lack of opportunity has on a young person's experience. In a sense, they're trying to make sense of why the young person's behaving on the basis that they're hungry. many of the young people, the team I work with in Cambridgeshire with sort of young substance users with multiple other problems, they might come to a session or be picked up by their key worker, and they may not have eaten for 24, 48 hours, and their belly is aching. And to sit down and try and do therapy with them, it's not going to be very helpful. So, a lot of our workers, they do a sort of, we call it muck therapy, but you're going to go and get them some food, and on the journey you might get some actual contact and some connection. And what you're offering is, again, that word contingency, that you've got a sense that this, hunger is probably not a good state for you to mentalise in. Okay. So it's this idea that, mentalising, there's nothing new, but I think there is a conscious attempt to try to create a language where some of the key big ways of understanding and intervening can be respectfully kind of held. And I think that that's absolutely critical to what we're trying to do. Okay, so I said right at the beginning, one of the features of mentalising is that we're not very good at doing it, or that it's fragile, that it gets switched off, and quite appropriately. So if this guy walked into the room now and started prowling towards me, it would actually not be very helpful on my survival value to spend a lot of time in an imaginative, musing and amused state of mind, kind of wondering what it might be like to be Mr. Tiger. This is not good. What I want in that sort of situation is a high degree of certainty and a high degree of speed with which I can, run away and offer one of you nice people in my place. But I need to do, and I need certainty, which is very non-mentalising but high survival value. So mentalising is only useful if it's happening in the right place. It's not very helpful if we sort of get all musy about the thing. One of the interesting things about adolescence is if you ask adolescents questions, they take a lot longer to answer some of them than either younger children or adults. So one of the questions this study, I can't remember the paper, but the study asked was, is it a good idea to swim with sharks? Now most adults just go no, and most children would go no, but adolescents would go, oh, well. I've seen a documentary of these guys swimming sharks. That was pretty cool. So it could be quite a good idea. So they both take longer to answer a question like that, and they also tend to have rather more sort of rather wider range of answers, which is quite an interesting thing. The adolescent predicament is that they can get rather into a sort of mentalising in the wrong place. If it gets very problematic and it's developing into more of a problem around their kind of long-term personality, people will have heard of this label that gets stuck on people, not particularly helpful in many ways, but as a shorthand it can be helpful, the borderline personality disorder. People with this predicament, one of the things that you notice is that they do what we call hypermentalising, or just massive, not very accurate, kind of compulsively kind of wondering, oh, well, when you did that, I wonder if it meant that, I wonder, and they overthink relationships massively in a way that gets them into big trouble, and they find it much harder to just kind of stop and do what's necessary. So I'm going to just point out that mentalising isn't like that. You don't start at birth and not be able to do it, and then you kind of go through adolescence and you pop out, you have a sort of mentalising mortarboard and degree, and then you've got it, you can mentalise. It's much more like this. Mentalising is on, off, and literally minute by minute. And one of the really fun things about working in a mentalising way is that absolute sort of being right there in the moment and sort of trying to work out, oh, are they mentalising at the moment? Are they not mentalising? Am I mentalising? Am I not? And it's that kind of absolute moment by moment idea that is worth trying to hold on to. So here's the adolescent predicament. Here's mentalising. Maybe, then again, maybe what they're after is this. Now, the adolescent has a particular problem. Very young children have this bit in spades. It works from very young children at all. This is sort of dealing with threat and sort of arousal and danger, particularly this thing called the amygdala, but various other bits deep inside the brain, quite an ancient bit of the brain. And we call that the affective node, the node that deals with emotion here and now, gets me ready to kind of fight the tiger or run away. So even little babies have got that. You can see a baby getting quite sort of startled and agitated and aroused. As the child starts to mature, there's some bits out in the side, these green bits, that starts to kind of mature. And we call this the detection node. And it's like a radar that is just sort of scanning the world and kind of comparing what your behaviour looks like with what my kind of play script as how people should behave when they're listening to somebody in a lesson. And likewise, you're scanning me and I'm reasonably well behaved at the moment. I'm talking, I'm showing you some slides. But if I started to sort of maybe stand on this chair, maybe on one leg, maybe kind of crouched up under the ceiling, and I started to flap my hands and squawk like a kind of bird, at a certain point your detection node would go, no, that's not funny. And not only that, it's embarrassing, and I'm kind of either going to walk out or we're going to hit him, or it's actually enough of us, we could wrestle him to the ground. And so your detection node would say this is not appropriate behaviour in this context. Now the dilemma for young people as they reach about the top of primary school, their detection node's pretty mature. And I know this for all three of my children. There's a distinct developmental stage where I've been accompanying each of them into a meeting at school, and kind of towards the school gates there's been an exchange that goes along the lines of, Dad, yeah, when we go in, yeah, I think I'm going to go in a little bit ahead of you actually, Dad. I can see some friends 100 yards ahead. Do you mind? I go, yeah, that's okay, yeah. And then they go, Dad, when we are in there, yeah, can you talk quietly? Oh, yeah. Or maybe just listen and don't say anything. That'd be good. That'd be good. Yeah, you could do that, Dad, couldn't you? And you suddenly realise I've become not just sort of super cool dad, ever perfect, but I'm a total liability. And they're in this dilemma at that point, that the detection node is saying this could all go really badly wrong. There's all kinds of social threats out there now. There's kind of weirdnesses that Dad does that he shouldn't because it's not appropriate. And they've got an arousal centre that says, get ready, run away. What they don't yet have, and you don't get because it's 2 or 3 years behind in maturational terms, is the kind of braking system of that engine that says, okay, just give him a couple more minutes. He was talking about standing on a chair and flapping his arms. It was an alarming thought, but he was only making a point. He wasn't really going to do it. That was what you were able to do, whereas my kids at that point would have been out the room and have just said, that's it, you're doing it again, Dad, it's too much. So that's the dilemma. So in a sense, how I would talk about this with parents and young people might be that this part of the brain is very new and it only ever works about at this volume. It's a kind of whispering part of the world. Well, it could be this, it could be that. Whereas there are other bits of the brain that the dinosaurs had, as far as we know, that do threat, danger, and quite appropriately, they go to volume 10. They go really loud, really fast, because they're about survival, okay? And that's a way of making sense of the different ways our minds work at different times that I find families and young people, they totally buy. And it's as far as we know, it's up to date with the science. So there are ways that this part of the brain do thinking that are quite different from mentalizing. It's very into certainty. Thoughts are the same as reality. If it's a thought in my head, it is the way the world is. And action is how you fix stuff. Then I hit him. That's how that kind of thinking works. Rather different from that kind of, well, it could be this, could be that. Get some ideas together, kind of weigh it all up. That's a different kind of thinking. Okay. So I like to think of this as the sort of AA sort of repairman for my constantly slightly stumbling in relationships. Okay, we're nearly there. I'm just going to go through a diagram that looks a bit complicated, but it's basically quite simple. And we need to just think about the situation that you find yourselves in with young people who are often not very good at mentalizing when you really want them to do some mentalizing, and instead they use rather primitive forms of thinking that, if you like, are the building blocks of mentalizing, but they're on their own not very helpful. So just bear with me on this diagram. So life can become too much. It's insurmountable. It might be too much for very ordinary reasons. Becoming adult is tough. Feeling that people want more of me than I can deliver is tough. Feeling rejected is tough. Or it might be insurmountable, too much for much more obviously pathological reasons. Childhood, sexual abuse, physical maltreatment, other forms of adverse parenting, and all the rest. When that happens, I just feel like, oh, that's too much. I've got systems in my brain that have been there for a long time. Lots of other animals have got them too. There's an attachment system. I'm in trouble. I look for help. I look for somebody in the room that is my attachment objects that I can just get close to and feel like if we're in touch and you're being nice now, you're going to go, yeah, no, don't worry, Dickon, they're okay. They're with us. So thank you. Okay. Whilst I'm finding my attachment object, my attachment system is active. If it's not that, then I'm trying to run away or fight people and things. I'm powered by adrenaline and all of that. So those are the systems that go to volume 10 that totally drown out poor little quiet whispering mentalizing. And when mentalizing gets drowned out, it's like the whole system says, okay, we're not doing the mentalizing, we're going to roll back to some old ways of thinking that worked in the past before we did this fancy pants whispering stuff. Okay? And we have kind of ordinary language for these and then pretentious language. So we're going to call it inside-out thinking. Some people call it psychic equivalence. We call it elephant in the room thinking. You can call it pretend mode, and you can call it quick fix thinking, and you can call it teleological mode. The reason we divide it this way is not just because we sort of had an idea one night, but as far as we're aware, these do connect with actual areas of the brain that you can see the developmental sequence that come in the baby's brain as you develop. And I'm just going to briefly describe that, and then we'll have a rest. So this is inside-out thinking. If I get into this inside-out thinking, it's a little bit like if a storm breaks out in my head, she hates me. It's not just that the storm's in my head. Would that it were so. The assumption is that that's the way the world is. I am in a world where she hates me, or I'm rubbish. It's not just, that's interesting, I'm thinking I'm rubbish. I didn't think I was rubbish yesterday, and I don't normally think I'm rubbish, but today I find myself thinking I'm rubbish. No, if I'm in this inside-out thinking, I'm in a world where I am rubbish. That's the way it is in this world. Yeah, do you see the difference? Yeah. So it's a little bit like, rather than the thought living inside my head, I live inside the thought. Yeah? The most extreme version is when you have a psychosis, and that's a sort of very fixed psychic equivalence where your delusions are such that you're absolutely convinced, even though everybody else is kind of looking at you and going, no, I really don't think that you are working for MI5 or whatever it is, or I don't think that there's this coming, but you're absolutely convinced. Now, we're saying that in a small way, all of us can get into those states of mind. It's where you find certainty, where you find yourself or other people looking a bit like this. This man has very little doubt in his mind about the kind of person I am, and the kind of help I'm offering, or the kind of motivations that he can see straight into my mind. You're always like this, you're never like that. And one of the challenges for the work that you do is, how do you respond to somebody who's in this state of mind? He is in psychic equivalence. The thoughts in his mind about me, in his mind, are absolutely how the world is. I am this complete, So the challenge for the worker is, if I really wanted for this man to move from kind of having all kinds of beliefs about me to actually kind of enacting a punch or something, I would argue that a good way to do that would be to not respond in the way that the mother responds to the baby. What she does is she marks and she mirrors. She shows the baby that I do take seriously how you feel. Oh, you are unhappy. Now, I wouldn't, if I did that to him, he would definitely punch me. Oh, you are unhappy. That wouldn't work. Yeah. But I do need to show him that I get the reality of where it is for him. So if I sort of just said to him, I can see that you're very angry, he'd probably hit me, I think. Yeah. I can see you're very angry. Yeah. But if I actually mirror, if you like, and show a bit of that, look, I can really see I've seriously upset you. I really have. I didn't mean to. Help me, just help me. I get it. I get that I've seriously pissed you off. I'm probably going to get hit, but I'm slightly less likely to get hit in that situation, would be my proposition to you. Because I'm trying to kind of, if you like, as Anthony Bateman puts it, this sounds like a ship steaming in one direction. And if I want to change that ship's direction, I can't just ram it and say, no, it's not like that, you're wrong. Yeah, or kind of, blandly kind of go, I can see that you're really angry. That would probably not work. I need to kind of bring my ship alongside. Then I can have a bit of a boarding party. When he sees that I take seriously what his state of mind is, and that I accept that's the reality for him, then there's just a chance that we can start to get a bit of conversation about, how did I give you the idea that that was happening, or how, help me understand more clearly where I got that wrong. So that's psychic equivalence, or inside-out thinking. Pretend mode, we call it the elephant in the room, and it's probably my favourite way of not being very good at mentalising, probably in common with a lot of therapists. We do a lot of very clever talk, all beautiful words that just make it all make sense, it's all fantastic, but there's a complete disconnect with the reality of what it's like for the other person in the room. The mother is actually just weeping and the child is picking their nose and looking out the window, and I'm kind of spinning this marvellous story about how, well, there's all kinds of things that have contributed to why this family is in such a problem. I'm so clever, I've got all the answers. It's just pretend, because I'm disconnected from the emotion of what's there, and I'm kind of missing, if you like, the elephant that's there in the room, that this is a family that's in collapse now. Okay.
Another sort of elephant.
Yeah, that's a big elephant. Okay, so pretend mode has its use. Kids pretend is how they rehearse different roles. They imagine themselves into different worlds. They kind of create imaginary worlds where they can practice different ways of being. And then there's kind of a little bit of reality comes from mum or dad who's prepared a really nice tea rather than the plastic cucumbers or whatever they're eating. And most kids are really happy to just kind of trot along and eat the real food and then come back and eat the plastic cucumbers afterwards. And I suppose what we're talking about as pretend mode would be a slightly different response, which would be something along the lines of kind of, no, you can keep your noodles, mum, we've got plastic kumquats and we've got slices of rubber toast here and we're perfectly fine with that. It would be a kind of denial of the sort of the reality, if you like, of what's out there. So the other way I like to think about it, I know I'm in pretend mode when I'm just in waffle. It's just clever sounding waffle. Too many words. So the final thing is that I solve by doing. The end justifies the means. That any kind of distress in my kind of world, my psychological world, will be solved by some kind of physical, measurable, definite outcome. Violence is a very common one that you look at. Drugs and alcohol, very common one that we look at. I felt really stressed. The solution is I need another spliff. I need another drink. I felt awful. I know the solution is when I bleed, I feel better. It just takes me to a different place. I know my state of mind will be different from now. Anything's better than now. Blood, definite release. Sort of. Those are all very, what we call teleological. It comes from a Greek word, the telos is the sort of the final state of affairs. So you can also get into very kind of quick fixy teleological relationships, and many of the young people that you work with, I think, get into these often. So they might say, you don't really care about me as a therapist. If you cared about me, you'd see me over the weekend. If you cared about me, you'd stay for another 2 hours. If you cared about me, you wouldn't go away on your annual leave. It's like, I'll know that you care about me only if I see you do this extra thing. That would be the measurable physical outcome that would say, yep, you care about me. Okay, not okay, you might care about me but also not be able to do that because you've got another bit of your life. Likewise, money, so mum, give me 20 quid to go out. No, I can't give you 20 quid. We've already agreed that we're not giving you 20 quid because you only spend it on drugs. Yeah, but if you loved me, you'd give me 20 quid because all my friends are going to be out there. If you understood how embarrassing and shaming it is for me to turn out with my mates without 20 quid, you'd definitely be giving me 20 quid. So in the child's mind, it's like 20 quid in my hand tells me mum loves me, no 20 quid tells me she doesn't love me. It's a very concrete outcome. Do you see, does that make sense? So all of these elements, and once of course you get into that way of working, it's very easy we get dragged into it. So, you know, in some of the situations I imagine, you know, young people sometimes need to be restrained. You know, if the young person's physically trying to hurl themselves out of a window, it's not okay to stand and sort of, you know, in a very sort of thoughtful way kind of reflect upon, you know, what it might be like to be the person hurling themselves out of the window. Of course you're going to be drawn in to getting teleological, and that's one of the examples where, you know, all of these methods of thinking have a certain value in the right place. It's right to get a bit teleological sometimes. It's perfectly right that someone running around with a knife actually does get apprehended and the knife is taken off them if there's a high risk that they're going to hurt somebody else with it or themselves. So please don't be scared of this. This is not something you need to learn, but it's worth just going back right to the beginning of my talk, that we know babies can detect these intentions. We saw the blobs. We know babies can detect emotions, and we know that they also know which way the parents' eyes are looking. They've got a detector for that, and that's by 3 months they've got all of that. Then at a year they do this weird thing where they'll kind of find something that interests them. Like for me, it's the kind of rainbow colours coming out of the projector, and they'll do this. They'll point at it, and then they'll look at the mum or the dad, and then they'll look back, and then they'll look back, and then they'll look back. And what they're waiting for is for some sign that you and I are on the same page, and they want you to look at the same thing that they're looking at. It's one of the tests we ask for when we're trying to assess a child for autism, because they don't tend to do that. But if you like, that's a very, very crude early form of mentalising, isn't it? Because it presupposes that, you know, when your eyes go up there, the fact that they're not, I've got some idea that what's in your mind is not what's in my mind, which is the nice rainbow colours in the projector. And when I see your eyes go up there, that's enough for me. It's not a very sophisticated form of mentalising, but it's like a kind of physical, if you like, rather a teleological, quick fix way of making sense that we're on the same page. Your eyes and my eyes are looking at the same thing, done, finished, you know, we're on the same page, I feel better. Yeah, it's rather a basic, very crude form of mentalising, but you can see where that way of solving problems comes from right back there. Likewise, the empathising system and the theory of mind mechanism, they come out. So in order for me to empathise and to feel empathised, it's like when I go, ah, and I see you go, oh, it's a bit like kind of, yeah, what's in my head is out there. It is the same. It's a world of, ah, and then I kind of go, oh, no, actually, hang on a moment. That's curious, because what you're giving me back is kind of similar but different, and I start to kind of think a little bit further than that. But that psychic equivalence is what enables a genuine connection between me and my mum or whoever else is I'm kind of crying out to. So psychic equivalence gives you something that's very sort of, it's like a passionate, close connection. And I'm very happy for members of my team to be in psychic equivalence about certain things. I'm very happy for anyone in a team that I work with to be completely, robustly in psychic equivalence around the thought having sex with our clients is wrong. You know, I want that to be not something that's got any doubt. I don't want anyone to have a think, well, yeah, but on certain circumstances, on the other hand. You know, that's totally fine for me, for someone to be absolutely. So there is a certain sort of reality contact element of that. So you can see that that's a kind of a bit of a connection. And likewise, in these bits of the brain where you do this kind of theory of mind, this kind of, you know, make believe. I wonder what it's like to be you. I wonder what it might be like to be in your shoes. That's a little bit like what pretend mode is. So the point about this is that it's only when you've built up all these building blocks of what we can do with our minds that we can get the kind of the icing on the cake, which is mentalising, which is balancing these kind of building blocks in the right thing. Enough psychic equivalence so that something genuine gets communicated. Yeah, enough teleology of this sort of quick fix stuff so that stuff actually gets done. You know, people get fed, people get, you know, caught when they're falling, those sorts of things, and enough pretend so that, you know, something new can arise in our minds. And that's the kind of the trick with mentalising. There's nothing new in it, because it's only just using what we've got in the most efficient way, and it's that conductor that says, oh, actually we need a little bit more doing right now because this guy's about to kind of go pop, or, you know, actually I need to just, you know, really connect with the emotional reality, or I need to do a bit more imagining and kind of this and that. So it's mentalising is when you're holding all of those roughly in balance, and at times some of the plates fall off and you're left with something that's a little bit less helpful. So that is the talk. If I don't go now, I will get my